Hey, so let's start. Howdy, partners. Howdy there. How you doing, James?
I'm doing great. How are you doing, Patrick?
I'm doing wonderful. This is my first time, doing a co-hosting with you, so this should be pretty fun and excited. And I'm looking forward to the partner that we have that we're gonna be talking about today. And just to give you guys a heads up of what the Howdy Partner shows and episodes are about, essentially we it's a weekly Twitch series where we highlight AWS partner network partners, which they build innovative solutions on AWS directly and been validated and approved and have their best practices baked into their solutions. So yeah, that's pretty much what the show is about. And I guess James, do you want to tell them who we have for today's show and what they more than likely going to be showcasing?
Yeah. So first off, everyone who watches this knows me. I'm James Spencer. I'm partner solutions architect here at AWS. Excited to be here on short notice. That's another day, story for another day. But joining us today is Rancher Government Solutions. I love Rancher personally. I'm not a shill. I promise. I was not paid anything for this. My previous jobs, we used Rancher. Almost all of our tech stack was on containers and Kubernetes. Rancher was pretty much our bloodline in managing that stuff. And for Kubernetes experts, even if you're an expert, it's not the most thrilling thing to try and manage all your clusters in command line or anything like that. So, control platforms definitely help save your life. And I'm curious today on it, genuinely, to see the government side of things and just kind of see how that goes. And I will stop talking now because I will go forever. Patrick, over to you.
Also, well, I'm also a partner solutions architect as well. You might have seen me on 2 or 3 episodes, but yeah, we pretty much validate our partner solutions that they have, making sure again that they're following the best practices. And I'm really excited. I'm not that fond, like too familiar with Kubernetes, especially how it ties in with the government. So I'm really stoked to see how this, aligns and how this plays out. So I'm stoked. And enough with me talking. Let's bring on Adam and Dan and let them go ahead and show us what they got. So that sounds good, guys.
Let's do it. Let's do it.
Awesome, awesome. Let's do it. Let's bring them on. Hey there.
Hey guys.
Hello there. Thank you for having us.
Yes, thank you very much. Excited to be here.
Awesome, awesome. I guess we can start with the intros. So yeah, let's go with Dan first.
All right. So, hi everybody. Thank you for allowing us to be here. My name is Dan McGuan. Everybody calls me dmac. I run the partner solution shop here at Rancher Government, and I also own our cloud go-to-market. So, how we engage with the big CSPs, that's my role and responsibility. And I'd say AWS takes up about 80% of my time, of my days. You guys are a very important partner to us, and we're very thrilled to be here. Thanks again.
Thank you.
My turn.
And Adam.
Hey everybody, my name is Adam Toy. I'm Chief Architect here at Rancher Governments. My lamest claim to fame here is I'm the first non-founding employee of Rancher Government. So I've been here almost since the beginning. In a prior life, I served as a technical lead in the intelligence community. When I first came here, I was a technical lead in the DoD, had a lot of experience of actually implementing Kubernetes at scale. Transitioned to this role probably about a year ago and really working on some fun stuff in terms of productization around federal requirements. So super happy to be here. Super excited for today.
Awesome, awesome. Well, great intros. I guess the first question I want to throw out to you all is, I see, we have Rancher and we see Rancher Government Solutions. So I'm just curious, what does that mean? And is there, like, what's the difference between, I guess, Rancher itself and, the Rancher Government Solutions part?
Sure. So Rancher is the name of a technology stack, as well as a name of the principal product in our portfolio, the Rancher Manager, which is a Kubernetes agnostic cluster manager that can sit atop any Kubernetes distribution. It very much does not care. Rancher Government Solutions is the arm of Rancher Labs that focuses exclusively on the U.S. government and its partners for mission critical outcomes for U.S. federal ecosystem and the U.S. federal customer base at large.
Oh wow! Cool.
Awesome. Adam, I'm curious. You mentioned you were in intelligence before. So I just Nothing you're just gonna say. You're gonna have to kill me afterwards, right? Like I hope or something.
I'll try to keep it last 5 games. Yeah, well, yeah. I'll try to keep a point that you can keep your life for this one. Yeah.
Okay, good. The cat over there would be a little upset if I.
But it is funny, just to layer on sort of what dmac said before, is that, I mean, inherently containers are sort of the future, right? From an application modernization perspective. And then in terms of needs and necessities, there's really no difference between the commercial space and the federal space, right? Everybody's working towards the same goal in terms of modernizing their applications to make sure that they're scalable, resilient, all of those things. We have some of the cooler use cases in terms of containers. We've taken our products and launched them into space on satellites, flew them on spy planes, a lot of cool things with our technologies on the federal side. But everyone's kind of working towards that same goal.
Awesome.
Wow.
Cool.
Wow.
So did you where did you guys want to start? Did you want to start talking about Rancher itself, or did we want to dive into the demo? How did you want to start?
So I think what I was hoping to be able to get across at the beginning here, because it's AWS Howdy partner. We are an ISV Accelerate partner. We do have validated software, and we are a certified AWS public sector partner. I think what I did want to do was illustrate for the audience at large how we've worked with AWS over the last year to kind of establish a crawl, walk, run set of realities for the viewers, right? Because I think people think Rancher and they think it's a cluster manager. I think that the way we focus here at Rancher Government could be of particular interest to the group that is going to be with us today. Be like, maybe I'm not really sure what Kubernetes is, or maybe I can get an EKS heartbeat, but I'm not really sure how to use it. Versus I kind of want to get my hands on it, and I'm not really sure I have a production grade requirement. Like, how do I do that at speed and with ease? And then I need to run this in prod because I need to get containers, halfway around the world to the warfighters, or, I need to be able to move a workload, from one domain to another domain, right? I think that in working with you guys over the last year, we've been able to establish this crawl, walk, run procedure. And I think if it's cool with you guys, illustrate from there, because the smart guy here is Adam, right? It's not me. We're going to, for the technical viewers, we're going to go crazy deep on this tech stack. And just for be able to establish kind of a run rate, hey, this is easy peasy, this is get smart, this is let's play, and then this is let's do the thing. So is that cool?
Yeah, it sounds good to me.
Awesome. So James, can I get my screen share real quick?
Yeah. Of course.
Yeah.
Thank you.
There we go.
And let's make this not draconian. Everybody's got this custom deck, right? Everybody's got a deck and oh yeah, whatever, right? So this is just put together for this one. So ultimately what we are the government focused arm of Rancher Labs, right? And Rancher Labs was acquired by SUSE in December of 2020. And so they wrapped a bow around the government business that was occurring with Rancher Labs at that time. And, here we are, RGS. Our focus here, as we've been kind of, noodling on from the beginning here, is the U.S. government isn't just a first-class citizen for us. It is the citizen, right? There are other Kubernetes providers out there that focus on certain market verticals and don't really ever treat government as the primary focus of their end work. And for us, that's our focus. Our Kube layer with RKE2 was designed explicitly for the U.S. government use case. So think FIPS enablement, think 800.53 guideline policy checkboxes. And we're doing a lot of really interesting stuff on security that Adam's going to demonstrate for in a minute. But ultimately, we are a FOCI mitigated entity, so that's foreign ownership, control, and interest. We're staffed 100% by U.S. citizens, and the overwhelming majority of our employees have high-level security clearances. I did want to comment again on what is this crawl, walk, run, and it's just about being able to enable all different types of users. Echoing back what Adam said, the container and Kubernetes is kind of like the new unit of compute, or will be the next unit of compute in this way that VMs were for from metal, and the government in certain environments can be very bleeding edge in their adoption, and mission requirements do drive a lot of that utilization. And for me, I'm a ex-NASA seller, I'm an ex-DOE seller. I've been doing open source my entire career. And it was initially very shocking to me at how futuristic the NASA end user, the DOE end user was when it came to adopting emerging open source technology. So in taking a piece out of that book, we wanted to build stuff that's like super capable and super secure, at the same time focusing exclusively on the US government. And that's what we kind of do here. So we'll talk about three things, and I'll just do this really, really fast. There will be links and stuff throughout the prezo, the roll, and the bottom line for any of the viewers that are interested. If you want to get your hands on it and you want to learn, we developed with AWS Public Sector Maryland, the AWS workshop for Rancher Gov. So that's going to kick up a cluster of our stuff. It's going to kick up a cluster of EKS. It's going to install the Rancher Manager. It's going to let you blend those things together. It's going to permit you to actually instantiate workloads and interact at the kube layer through the management console, which we're going to be demonstrating here shortly. And this is the super lowest friction, easiest way just to get exposed to what we do, how we do it, and what it means for Kubernetes administration at large. If you are a little more advanced, I recommend you try ranchergov.com. This is a free marketplace listing. We've decided to call this Test Flight. It will kick up an HA Kubernetes cluster on top of GovCloud. So this is, again, focused at the US Gov end user or the systems integrator end user, working with government, where you're going to get EC2 instances, you're going to get some EBS volumes, you're going to get some ELBs, you're going to get some Route 53 infrastructure, and you're going to get a fully HA RKE2 Kubernetes layer plus the Rancher Manager. I mean, it's productionable, but completely unsupported. And it doesn't get you as far as what's available now for the push button acquisition by users who are running. This is our marketplace item for RKE2, our kube layer again, and the Rancher Manager. And this is the one that actually installs to the STIGs. And what's important to note is that we are the only vendor-approved STIG for Kubernetes that's actually sanctioned by DISA. And the Rancher Manager, the multi-cluster management technology, is, again, the only DISA-approved STIG for multi-Kubernetes management. And we're the only vendor in the software business that can make that claim. Another thing that's important to note, too, is that because this stack is inherently agnostic at the Linux layer, you can bring whatever Linux you like. So if you're a RHEL shop and you got RHEL STIGs running, but we're fine with that. If you want to bring Rocky, we're totally fine with that. You want to bring SLES, we're fine with that. So you can configure this to your utmost design. But here, this is this is how you run, right? This is how you run for government. It's you push a button, you acquire it, you kick off a CloudFormation build, and it stands the entire thing up lightning speed. Like, go have a sandwich and come back, and you've got fully secure kube management. And then, of course, you're going to get all the really awesome stuff that's inherent to the solution that it's got tie-ins that leverage Amazon APIs and to build dynamic services on top of AWS.
And dmac, let me step in and provide a little clarity around those acronyms, because the federal government is pure acronym soup.
Yes.
Once you're in there, you kind of forget about the fact that nobody understands the other acronyms. So context of DISA. So DISA is the federal agency that defines information systems security and sort of defines those standards in terms of how technology is secured up to federal standards. One of those implementation details is known as a STIG, or a Secure Technical Implementation Guide. And it's essentially the federal standard to say, I'm going to take a piece of software, I'm going to configure it, I'm going to set it up, deploy it in a manner that it's truly secured for federal systems that are working on very potentially, what's the word I'm looking for, sensitive data workloads and things like that. So as of today, our RKE2 distribution, which was, again, built to those specific standards, is the first and currently only supported Kubernetes distribution to attain a STIG. It's a very long process to get there. There's a lot of things that go into it. But we'll kind of talk to some of the other capabilities around that. I just wanted to...
Thanks for catching that, Adam. I mean, you've been doing this for so long. It's like you speak in alphabet soup and you just think that everybody is like tracking along. It's like, oh yeah, like for example, like, well, what is ICMP, right? That's the AWS Intelligence Community Marketplace. we'll be there in a little bit, but again, alphabet soup. My apologies there. Appreciate you stepping in and clearing that up.
Yeah. I just want to point out I dropped some links in the chat. If you want to follow along with the demo today, we put a link up there for the workshop, and check out RGS on the marketplace. Marketplace is probably the easiest way to get solutions directly to your environments and try them out. So definitely check those out. I just wanted to ask a question. Adam, you can say, no comment, but you said that Rancher is the only one that has a management solution that's approved with like all the government compliance kind of things.
So,
Is it?
So essentially Rancher government has gone through the process to attain a stake for two components. One is our Kubernetes distribution of RK2. So RK2 originally was actually named RKE-Gov. A lot of people don't know that. It was built specifically for the federal government based off of some of our customers' unique requirements that came with that. DMAC already hit on a little bit. That includes FIPS supported encryption, SE Linux support built in. It's basically sort of a pre-configured, pre-hardened Kubernetes distribution that has a lot of the knobs turned and switches flipped. So it's secure by default. So that has a stake. But the centralized cluster manager, the Rancher flagship product that I'm going to demo in a little bit, that also has a stake. So yes, as of today, those are the first two to have that distinction, which is a pretty big, massive differentiator for some of our tools.
Yeah, that's huge. That's big.
Huge.
So I think one thing that's to be mindful of as well, and thank you for that, Adam. The one thing to be mindful of is taking open source like upstream components and hardening them or securing them such that they can work in these high side or classified environments is no insignificant undertaking. And in that we had Rancher Labs had pre-existing relationships with DoD customers that were asking for certain considerations be made from Kubernetes vendors around how do I get a platform like Kubernetes built for government use, but fully open source, right? At some point, the manpower that's required to make those, turn those knobs and flip those switches, as Adam was describing, it's not insignificant. And Rancher Labs decided to open source all of those configurations as it came to the kube layer and create a separate distribution of Kubernetes for this purpose. And that's what RKE2 is, Rancher Kubernetes Engine 2.0, or Rancher Kubernetes for Government, however you want to describe it. It's the one with all of that open source know-how and all the engineering know-how and then all the compliance know-how combined into a single substrate that is freely and open sourced to the upstream community. And as a result of that, we enjoy being the Kubernetes substrate for many a dozen software factories inside the Department of Defense, and actually there's some civilian agencies that use it as well. But obviously we can't be going around name dropping.
Nice. Cool. Yeah, I dropped another link in the marketplace as well. There it is on the screen. It's a long thing, so it's better in the chat if you just click it and check it out that way. Cool. Yeah, this is awesome. Like, I'm
done with this deck, man. If James, you want to kill this one and go to Adam's screen share so we can actually get our hands on it. I mean, don't get me wrong, I love showing this one because this is the one that people can buy. But what people come here to see is the really cool tech, and I for one am really excited to see Adam do it for the 400th time.
Definitely. Sorry again for in my defense, I was put in this co-hosting position in the last hour or two, so
sorry good.
No, it's cool. I mean, James, I think it's pretty cool. I mean, you've had your hands on our technology before, so some of this should look very similar to you, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
I was gonna say I know well, not exactly, but I was like, oh, I know exactly what this is for the most part.
James, do you remember what version of Rancher you were using by chance?
What version? Oh God, no. It was when did I start? We circa very beginning of 2021 was when I started. So whatever version
the
that
UI
was.
probably looks a little bit different for you, given they essentially did an entire revamp of the UI. For 5, so it probably looks significantly different with a lot more capabilities built into it.
Yeah, it was. I think it was right about then when there was a huge, big overhaul and things looked. Yeah, right about that time. Yep.
Awesome. Cool. Yeah, I mean, if you guys want, I can certainly dive in, sort of go through what we do, all the capabilities.
Yeah,
And,
I was actually going to ask real quick. We mentioned in the if people wanted to join along with the demo or the trial, if they do that, will it spin up all the things they need for this? Do they have to have their own account?
This won't follow entirely linearly with that. That being said,
Okay.
especially the workshop that is built for AWS, it's incredibly intuitive. I've gone through it. I've had friends go through it. It'll get you all the capabilities that you're seeing today for you to play around with. You'll essentially get a bare bones Rancher instantiation that you're going to see here today to be able to play with, spin up clusters, do a lot of the things that you're seeing here today. So it'll essentially give you and empower you to sort of walk through the capabilities that I'm going to demo.
Got it. Okay, cool.
Awesome. Cool. Shall I kick it off?
Yeah.
Let's go.
Cool. So I have prayed to the demo gods today. This is a live demo, so let's all hope that nothing goes horrifically wrong, but you never know, right? So for those of you who haven't seen it before, this is the Rancher Multi-Cluster Manager. This is our flagship product. This is that central and secure place for you to manage and maintain not only the Kubernetes cluster that Rancher itself is running on, but your entire fleet of downstream clusters. And that doesn't matter what distribution of Kubernetes you're using. You could leverage hosted solutions like Amazon EKS. You can manage on-prem solutions, potentially running in a data center on vSphere or Harvester, which is our HCI solution. You can even manage those tactical edge solutions like we talk about, especially in our line of business, things like FPGA devices, IoT devices. All of those things can be managed centrally and securely from Rancher. And James, Patrick, DMAC, by all means, if you guys have any questions as I'm going through this, see any questions, have any commentary, feel free to interrupt me. I have no problem with that.
For sure.
So,
I like the little pictures.
This is one of the things on the federal side we started to shift is provide a little branding around the federal government. We're working on a new branding that might actually have some jets and things be flying in the background. So look out for that in the upcoming version.
It's also something you can change via UI extensions. We have customers and partners who actually who skin this with like their own branding. And as Adam gets deeper and deeper in, you can actually start configuring the Helm charts that are placed in the repository. I mean, things get really, really sophisticated really fast. Oh, this will be fun.
Yeah.
That's you just prompted a question for me.
Sure.
I know in a lot of other solutions, maybe not Kubernetes ones, but like there's like open source extensions or paid extensions, just for anything under the sun. And like that's an example. Does it have that kind of capability? You can click a button and install some extensions or something.
Yeah, you're definitely setting me up. That's a good setup. I'm definitely going to cover that. Get to the app catalog, 100%. So Rancher in and of itself, which we'll get to in a little bit, comes with an app catalog.
Yeah.
Essentially, the packaging mechanism for Kubernetes, there's two of them. The main one is known as Helm, and that's sort of how you package an application to deploy onto Kubernetes. Rancher comes with a set of vetted Helm charts that point and click. You can do click ops, get that application deployed fully HA, regardless of sort of what those applications are. That's also fully extensible to the point that you can carve out your own app catalog and manage it within Rancher and kind of have a click ops approach to applications. But we'll definitely walk through that in a little bit when we get there.
Cool. Yeah. When you said app catalog, I was like, oh, duh. Yeah, I remember that.
It's been a while, right?
Yeah.
Cool. So the first thing I do want to talk about, because I mentioned secure, and I think that's, especially in our line of business, incredibly important. How do we make sure that all of these things are secured, given we're talking about a centralized management plane? So the first thing I want to walk through is that component of it. So I'm going to click my hamburger menu up here, go to users and authentication. And the first thing I want to talk about are auth providers. So most enterprise-grade entities out there already have an IDAM solution that are sort of managing all of their users and all of their access controls. We don't want to necessarily have to reinvent the wheel there. That's why Rancher itself plug and plays with most of the big names that are out there. You have your Active Directory, your Azure AD, things like GitHub. You also have the ability to do things, especially in the federal government, support Keycloak. Keycloak is incredibly important for things like X509 certificate authentication. So we try to plug and play that way from our users' perspective, our customers' perspective. They can leverage that pre-existing user base to do that authentication piece, right? So that's one side of the coin. What about the authorization piece, which is probably the more important thing when you're talking about security? So Rancher comes out of the box with a very robust set of roles that you can apply to users or groups of users. They're scoped one of three ways. You either have globally, think of this across the enterprise. This is at that Rancher level above all of your clusters. But then you also have the ability to do cluster level roles. So things like doing cluster backups, rotating certificates, managing nodes within clusters, all of those things. And then you even have it down to the project or namespace level, and even individual resources within namespaces. So you can really carve out exactly what you need to in terms of who has access to what. That way, for instance, if you have a cyber assessor who's coming in who probably shouldn't have write access to everything, but might need read access to specific things, you can certainly carve that out. Now, one other note about that, if you've worked with Kubernetes before, you're probably well familiar that Kubernetes in and of itself is fully extensible. So we needed to add the ability to be flexible in terms of these roles and give our customers the ability to create their own roles. So if I come up here and click this role over here, I can essentially create a role based off of any verb and any custom resource definition that exists across my fleet of clusters. So again, this is all about empowering our users to really lock down their clusters and lock down the centralized aggregation point that you're seeing here. And one other note before I give you guys a chance to speak, everything you're going to see here today from a Rancher experience is tied back to these RBAC controls. And I'll kind of emphasize that as we go through, but security really is sort of our top important thing, given the fact that this is that centralized management plane. So a different user experience as they log into Rancher is going to fully depend on the roles that they have access to. And I'll kind of demo that once I get around to cluster management. Well, I'll pause there. You guys have any questions?
Yeah, I got one, Adam. So, and this looks amazing, by the way. So I'm curious. I did see you had a section for the identity providers there. So how easy is it to integrate? Because I know that can be a project sometimes of its own. So is it pretty straightforward?
Absolutely. So it's incredibly easy. It is somewhat situational depending on which IDAM solution you're leveraging. Naturally, in context of the big ones, Keycloak is incredibly easy. It's point and click. One thing to note, and this is going to get, it's going to be more obvious in an upcoming solution. It actually also supports generic OIDC, which a lot of things are moving towards. This could actually be used today with this Keycloak one, but it's going to be a little more obvious in an upcoming version of Rancher. But yeah, it's basically point and click. You fill out what you need from that specific IDAM solution in here, and then through API calls, it'll go do what it needs to on that side. There's no other integration points that are required there.
Oh, sweet. We'd love to see Cognito as one of those IDPs.
Yeah, so that's been in talks. The only thing is, and it depends on the technology, much like anything else, right? That integration points between APIs can always be a challenge and a non-insignificant effort. So we're always looking to grow out sort of that off-provider list as we continue to grow this, with Cognito definitely being probably a top candidate for a future release.
Thank you. Appreciate that. That looks cool. So any questions for you, James?
Yeah, I was just gonna say it reminds me a lot of AWS IAM stuff, like users, roles, groups, policies. So with that, I was thinking, you pointed at the roles. Are there like Rancher managed roles, like kind of like how we have AWS managed ones? So like, it's cool that I can customize everything, but sometimes I just, I want to develop a role. Click. Like, do we have that kind of thing?
In terms of
admin,
can you clarify that a little bit?
I guess you mean like prefabbed, like
I guess,
roles.
Yeah.
So
yeah, fair enough. So like these are those prefab roles right here, and these
got it.
And the TLDR on this for the most part are tied back to Kubernetes primitives, if you will. So Kubernetes has sort of your baseline things that every Kubernetes cluster has, right? You have your secrets, deployments, pods, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. These are sort of applicable to that. The one challenge, given the fact that Kubernetes in and of itself is extensible, is the fact that if I write my own operator with my own custom resource definitions, it's tough to sort of automate roles around that, just given the fact that the world is that developer's oyster, you know what I mean? And they can really carve out however they want to do it with that. So this built-in role, for the most part, if you're talking about an engineer working with Kubernetes, or an admin coming in who might not be sort of an expert when it comes to Kubernetes, but just wants to manage and maintain applications and cluster management, which we'll get into in a little bit. It all still applies back to these built-in roles that come with it. So once we get into the cluster management piece and the application management piece, I think that'll make a little more sense in terms of the demo. It's a good question, though.
Okay. Cool.
Cool.
So that kind of covers the users and authentication piece. Again, everything you're seeing today will tie back to that. The way I like to carve out Rancher is the fact that Rancher essentially breaks things down into two aspects. The first aspect of that is your infrastructure. You can think of this as sort of the Kubernetes piece of the pie, not the applications running on Kubernetes. The applications running on Kubernetes is the second piece. But the first thing I want to talk about is that first piece, the infrastructure. How can I manage and maintain all of my clusters, do things like certificate rotation, backups, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So with that, I'm going to go to my home button here just to kind of show you guys the home screen. You can see here, this Rancher is already managing a number of Kubernetes clusters. I am leveraging RK2 running on Amazon EC2s, and I'll demo actually spinning up a new cluster from this. It's super easy to get there. I also have Harvester running on my home lab, which this is pointing to. And that's our HCI hyperconverged infrastructure offering. It's essentially a hypervisor with a lot more capabilities and more integrated experience built into it. I don't know if we'll have a whole lot of time to get to that today. We'll see if we get there. But the whole point of that is basically you can manage any Kubernetes cluster under the sun. It doesn't really matter from our perspective. Now,
I think the one thing I wanted to mention there too, for those of us or those on the call, that if we don't get to Harvester, right? If you have heard of KubeVirt, Harvester is a hypervisor that leverages KubeVirt, which is funny because you have to think about who in the right mind came up with the idea and then it actually works, right? Like somebody's sitting around, like they're at a bar, it's like 2 o'clock in the morning, and they're like, "Yo, dude, but what if you put the VM in the container, man?"
It could be the next.
That's what you do, and it's brilliant.
Of Inception too.
Yeah, it's unbelievable.
Get to leveraging. So KubeVirt basically takes virtual machines and runs them as pods in Kubernetes. The crazy thing with Harvester then is on those VMs running as pods, you can spin up Kubernetes to then run pods. You're like 30 layers down in the dream sequence of Inception once you start piecing.
Oh, wow.
It's like as an old NASA dude, OpenStack for on-demand HPC, right? Remember the installation mechanism was called OpenStack on OpenStack. You literally installed OpenStack on a single node with all of its services, and then used OpenStack installed over top of it to propagate itself. So this is not that. This is put the VM in a container, dude. It's pretty straightforward.
That's awesome.
Yeah, we'll see. Maybe we'll get time to just walk through the UI a little bit and show those capabilities at the end because it is awesome. I love Harvester; it's great. But we'll see if we get there. But in terms of creating a cluster, so Rancher, I want to emphasize the fact as well that Rancher was really built for that end user who might not necessarily be a Kubernetes SME. If you're sort of getting into Kubernetes, it is a big thing to bite off, right? There's a lot of complexities that go with Kubernetes, especially if you're just doing it bare bones, going out and spinning up sort of an upstream Kubernetes cluster. Rancher exists to alleviate a lot of those pain points. And that's really sort of the emphasis around this. Is it's built for that end user who really just wants to get their application running on a cluster and make sure that their infrastructure is up and running and maintaining that, right? They don't want to have to go into a command line and execute all those capabilities. So to that point, let's kind of walk through the ClickOps aspect of this. And I'm going to make that a little bit smaller so you guys can kind of see everything that you can do here. So from a Rancher perspective, you have the ability from Rancher to provision a Kubernetes cluster onto any one of these number of offerings here. So from Rancher, I can go and provision an Amazon EKS cluster directly from Rancher and then manage that EKS cluster from Rancher. And that is not necessarily a pre-existing EKS cluster. That is making the API calls to Amazon to configure that EKS cluster for you, spin that up, get it running, and then Rancher will manage it from there. Now, if you're looking for a more tailored, secured implementation of that, we also have the ability to deploy our Kubernetes distributions of RK2 or K3S onto VMs in virtually any environment that you're going to be pointing to. That includes Amazon EC2s, which I'll demo in a couple of seconds. But if you're working in an on-prem environment and you have a hypervisor like VMware vSphere, you can leverage that. You can also, as I mentioned before, use Harvester to deploy clusters onto Harvester. And to take that even a step further, because we wanted to cover all of our bases, you also have the ability to essentially provision clusters onto any piece of hardware that's out there. So I'm just going to kind of walk through that really quick. I'm not going to actually demo this, but I'm just going to put test cluster and click create here. And what this is going to give you is a long-lived idempotent curl command that you can store in your infrastructure as code, put in your cloud init, whatever the case may be. The only dependency to get RK2 up and running on a VM or a bare metal machine is the curl command. That's it. Everything beyond that will be taken care of from the installer, which is incredibly powerful, especially if you've worked with some of the alternatives that are out there from a Kubernetes perspective. You have to bake in and bring your own CNI and configure a lot of things. Rancher with RK2 and K3S take a lot of those complexities out for you to sort of streamline that process. But that's one of the bread and butters. Then you can see here, as I select the specific role, this command can change. Then, like I said, take the scroll command, store it. It's long-lived. Anytime a VM or an EC2 spins up with this curl command running on top of it, it'll automatically register it and add that to the cluster. So incredibly powerful.
Can I sprinkle a little magic on top of that too, Adam? Do you mind?
Absolutely.
So I think the in the context of working with you guys at AWS, we are, and also being partner first, right? You guys really rely on some key partners on the public sector side of the house to enable downrange mission outcomes for our mutual government customers. Is that this particular capability that Adam's talking about does permit an end user? Let's say you got a Snow device or a handful of Snow devices, and they are in the hands of some sailors, and they're somewhere in the Indo-PACOM or something, somewhere out in the IO, and like if you can get a stable network connection to that box from your AWS VPC, and you can get to those Snows downrange through a stable connection, whether that's through one of the DoD networks or maybe you're using a standalone satellite network, you can re-provision your Kubernetes clusters on the fly from halfway around the world. You don't even need to be anywhere near them. This capability in being able to basically lay down what is effectively a bootloader onto the EC2 infrastructure that lives on that Snow device, that forced phone home, that handshake basically turns that Snow device into a downrange Kubernetes resource that Rancher is effectively managing. So you can lay down whatever Kubernetes stack you want to, and then if you have like a CI/CD pipeline built in your VPC, where all your developers on the state side are actually hammering on applications that are going to go out into the theater, that those applications over that same network connection can be laid down halfway around the world over the network. It's a huge capability. We're working hand in glove with the Snow engineering team to bring that capability to bear for our customers and government. And we foresee the tooling that makes that possible as becoming the de facto standard, in open source, to be able to reach out and touch something and then also get Kubernetes onto it and bring an application stack to wherever that is, whether it's is it a Raspberry Pi? Is it a programmable logic controller? Or is it a Snowball, on a ship in the middle of the ocean? We think that this capability in concert with you guys is going to be extremely powerful.
Yeah, I actually had that. So I got the Snowball on Monday, had RK2 up and running on it in a matter of hours, only because I was doing other things. I would be able to show it to you. I just took it to my basement because it does run a little bit loud behind me, but incredibly simple to get from taking a fully edge capable Snow device and getting RK2 with fully HA capabilities packaged on top of there.
It runs loud, but does it run hot?
No, so it hasn't run hot yet. I haven't checked on it today for what it's worth. I was down there. I was down there for a significant portion of time on Monday, just kind of messing around with it, getting used to it, and it performed swimmingly. So no complaints.
Love it.
I've never actually, to be fully transparent, I've never seen any of the Snow devices in person. So that's kind of fun.
Maybe we can, I'm sure some viewers out there may not know what a Snow device is. Can someone, I guess, give them a heads up of what that is?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I can do it, but I don't work at AWS. I mean, James. Just the TLDR Snow devices are ways to physically transfer your data. Sometimes you have situations where, running petabytes of data over a network into, some database somewhere or something isn't it's going to take you 6 months. It's going to take you 9 months.
Mhm.
You don't have that kind of time. So that's when there's the snow family of stuff. There's snowball, snow cone, and the infamous snowmobile. I think that's still around. It's literally on a giant
Mhm.
semi truck. It's
Yeah.
nuts.
The
And they
container.
will literally, yeah, AWS will literally drive it over to you. You can put your data in it physically, and then they will take it to the data center and ship it out that way. It reminds me of that old experiment. Someone like back in the day, they wanted to put like 5 gigs across the internet versus attaching a 5 gig
Yep.
where it's flash card to a
Yep.
carrier pigeon, and the carrier pigeon got there faster.
Beat their
It,
fast data.
yeah, it kind of follows that mentality where you don't have
Yeah.
that kind of time, and it's
Yep.
just faster just to do that. But I digress. What I was going to ask real quick was, I know it's not entirely, the same. It's not apples to apples, obviously, but ECS is,
Yep.
that's just ECS question mark. Like, is there any sort of thing or integration with the ECS?
So that's a good question. No, only because, especially in our environment, and our customers, especially on the federal side, are really tailored around sort of a hybrid approach when it comes to the infrastructure they're managing it. The
That
one
makes sense.
great benefit of Kubernetes is the fact that you're going to have that standard API, regardless of where you're deploying your applications to, which makes that standard very consistent, right? And you can develop your applications very specifically for Kubernetes and deploy it into EKS, deploy it into RK2, deploy it to K3S at the tactical edge. It's sort of that standardized approach. So we are a Kubernetes company at heart. A lot of people don't know this, but Rancher actually started out prior to sort of their transition over to Kubernetes as a Kubernetes competitor, probably much like sort of what ECS was and is to this day. But we realized very early on that Kubernetes sort of won the war and transitioned to sort of be the best that we could be in the Kubernetes space. So, yeah.
That makes perfect sense.
Yeah. Awesome. So keep the ball rolling. I'm just going to clean this cluster up really quick since we're not actually going to use that. But let's go ahead and actually spin up an EC2 cluster running RK2 so you guys can kind of see how that looks, what the user experience is that goes with that. So again, Rancher tries to be as intuitive as possible when it comes to how you're provisioning these things. So hopefully this makes sense to you all, especially on the AWS side, given you're going to see some AWS vernacular in here. But let's just call this AWS EC2 demo. And I'm going to keep this as simple as possible, but in context of the machine pools, you can carve those out any number of way that you want to. To that point, if you've worked with Kubernetes before, there's sometimes that you want a specific node pool that has things like taints and tolerations. Think of the potential situation where you have a GPU-based EC2s running and you only want specific workloads to get there. You have the ability from here to apply taints and then tolerations on your applications. That way, only things that you want to be scheduled there will actually get scheduled there. So that's the major impetus for these machine pools, but it gives you a lot of flexibility to sort of carve out what applications get deployed where. I'm going to keep it simple for the sake of the demo. I'm just going to create one pool called main with 3 machines in it, and they're going to be all-in-ones as we call it. So it's going to have our control plane capabilities of etcd, which is the data store for Kubernetes under the hood, our control plane, which has the API server and all the things that make Kubernetes works. And then we're going to also define it as a worker so actual applications can run there as well. Also going to keep it simple. Let's just do an M5 XL. Sure, that works.
I hope it works.
Yeah, find out. I'm going to pick my public VPC for the sake of simplicity. I'm just going to leave the IAM instance profile empty for now. However, I want to emphasize that from Rancher, and we'll kind of cover this once we get down a little bit low. So let's start working down there. You also have the ability to encrypt the volumes under the hood that are getting attached to your application. You can specify specific KMS keys. You can do spot instances for specific node pools. We are actually doing this in some of our internal things where we're leveraging spot instances for build workers. That way you have like build workers that you don't want running 24/7, right? They're only there as you want like a pipeline to kick off, or whatever the case may be. Incredibly valuable to leverage something like a spot instance. But these are all the things you can carve out per node pool. But sort of at the cluster, overarching cluster level, down here, here's where all those configurations come into play. And you essentially have full control over how you want to configure your Kubernetes cluster. You can specify the Kubernetes version. I'll just leave it as the latest and greatest. RK2 comes with some core system services, things like core DNS for internal DNS management within the cluster, an ingress controller of Nginx, and a metric server. You have the option if you want to bring your own device to disable those. You can also do a lot of things such as define etcd snapshots from Rancher. etcd is incredibly important. If you're working with Kubernetes today and you're leveraging etcd and you're not doing backups, please do that, because if you lose it, trust me, I've been there. It's an absolute nightmare to get it recovered. So Rancher makes that simplistic. You can back up to any S3 compatible backend, whether that's S3 or your on-prem leveraging MinIO, things like that. And the one thing I want to emphasize with Rancher is that everything within Rancher is just another Kubernetes manifest. It's another Kubernetes resource. Now, to that point, when I create a cluster, that's just a YAML file containing all the bits that I'm creating here, right? To that point, and this will make a lot more sense once we get into the automation piece around Rancher, I can actually label this cluster. So I'm going to go ahead and just add a label called security enabled. That's a little teaser. We'll get there in a little bit once we get to the automation piece, kind of see how that plays into it. But yeah, you essentially have full control over the control plane, however you want to set that up. Another note, you can also configure private container registries. I'm leveraging our private registry, which contains our secured images that are digitally signed. We'll talk about that once we get to Carbide a little bit later. That is an authenticated registry, so I'm just going to configure that authentication piece and click create, and that's it. So essentially what it's going to give me is a 3-node Kubernetes cluster running on EC2s pre-configured that I have full control, full management of from the Rancher UI at the click of a mouse. If you've ever tried to stand up Kubernetes outside of that before, you probably know how big of a pain that can be. So this is just one kind of small piece of the puzzle. I think my record for this is around 5 minutes. It takes anywhere from 5 to 10 minutes, usually right in between there, to get this full cluster up and running. Any commentary?
Right, because sprinkle a little on there real quick too. I think it's important to note that and I know Adam will get there. So you see other managed services of Kubernetes as first-class citizens inside the Rancher Manager, right, including EKS. One of the important things to note about the government world is that when you're operating in an air gap and you're bringing software behind the wall into a classified domain, there are a whole bunch of policies, procedures, and guidelines that various agencies have to abide by in order to obtain what's known as an ATO, which is an authority to operate. You may also see it as CATO, which is conditional authority to operate. And basically what it does is it builds a theoretical enclave around software that's being used by multiple individuals in various classification domains. And that doing that on premise with your own software can be very difficult to do. So being able to provision, the RKE2 Kubernetes, let's say you're on the high side of AWS network and you want to build your own kube service because you have to own that entire service as a result of your mission. You are going to be required by federal guidelines to obtain an authority to operate for that cluster. And you don't just inherit one per se, because all the software you want to run above the managed service level, you also have to get inspected by a third party and make sure it adheres to all of these guidelines and security postures. So we are bringing the full stack of the software, including the tools that you're going to necessarily use to build your applications, to that walled garden to accelerate the pace with which you can obtain your authority or conditional authority to operate. And that's really driven by the end user's mission, or the focus and the outcome for the software that's being run there. And in doing like Adam's saying, is like you can get this up so fast and then inherit all of those security controls and procedures that make getting that authority to operate way less of a headache than it otherwise is.
Yeah, great point, dmac. Very good point.
Great.
Cool. So there's a couple other things I wanted to cover from an infrastructure cluster management perspective. So once the cluster is up and running, what if I want to do some maintenance on it? What if I want to, for instance, let's go ahead and click on my dev cluster. What if I want to do things like perform an etcd snapshot? I can do that directly from Rancher, click of a mouse. An incredibly important thing is rotating certificates. The way it works with Kubernetes in general is that the certificates that get created for traffic between components within Kubernetes expire every year. That's obviously configurable, but that's the default. Rotating that without Rancher can be kind of a pain. You got to get to every single node, make sure you run the right command, restart the service, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Click of a mouse, it's done. Super trivial to do it from here. Another note, and this is especially important with RKE2, that data store that I mentioned before, etcd, is fully encrypted. You also have the ability to rotate the encryption keys of that data at rest, which obviously from a security perspective, you should be doing that at a somewhat consistent pace. Now, beyond that, you also have the ability to scale up your node pools however you want. If I wanted to add a node, I click that button. In a matter of a few seconds, you'll see a new node starting to join this cluster. Again, it's as trivial as possible. This is really built for that end user, that person who doesn't necessarily want to be a Kubernetes expert, and we don't expect them to be a Kubernetes expert. Now, one other thing to note about that, and I promised I would do this, everything from this UI is tied back to the RBAC controls. So if I go back to my home screen here, you see I have currently 5 clusters that are coming online, one that's updating. I'm going to go ahead and log out and just log into a user that has very finite access to this. One second here. Test user. And you'll see that my UX around Rancher is entirely different. So this user essentially has sort of read access to the dev cluster, and that's it. So it's an entirely different UX built around that, tied back to our back controls. Incredibly powerful from that perspective. Another thing from a Rancher perspective, and I'm going to sign back in as my admin user just for simplicity's sake. If you are a Kubernetes person, you want to be able to do sort of those level integration points with Kubernetes, you still have the ability to do that from Rancher directly. So give this a second to load. Oops, sorry, I clicked the wrong button here. I can still do it from here. So I can drop down into a kubectl shell, have full access scoped to my roles to this cluster. So again, this isn't me having God mode to kubectl. If I'm signed in as that test user, I still only have access based off the roles that are assigned there, but it has access to everything that you would expect from a Kubernetes perspective. It also has your helm command. It has, and we were talking about this prior to things kicking off, K9S, which is sort of a management tool built for Kubernetes, sort of streamline some of the command line interfaces that go with Kubernetes. So all those capabilities built into Rancher that you can do it all from this one UI behind that authentication method that I said before. If you prefer the terminal, I am a terminal guy. This is usually my approach. You still have the ability to download a kube config. Now, I want to emphasize, even that kube config is still tied back to your controls within Rancher. Essentially, your request through that kube config, even locally, proxy through Rancher, and Rancher is doing that piece to make sure that you only have access to what you need to perform your specific function. And one other thing before we dive into the application, maybe take a short break, is what if you have pre-existing infrastructure that's out there in the nether and you want to be able to manage that with Rancher? You might have an old Cube ADM cluster running. You might have an existing EKS cluster, some of those sorts. You also have the ability to import those into Rancher and still have that same user experience when it comes to managing it. So from that perspective, I'm just going to do test import here and click create. And that is going to give me a kubectl command, or in the event that you're using self-signed certificates, an insecure curl command to actually provision the agent on that downstream node, downstream Kubernetes cluster, whatever it is, and still manage it from Rancher. So when I said before that we don't care what Kubernetes distribution you're using, we really don't. We try to build this as flexible as possible with the understanding that our customers with all their unique use cases might be leveraging different infrastructure, different distributions, things like that. So you guys have any questions, commentary before we take a short little break and get into the application piece of this?
I don't have a question, but I do want to do. I do see we have a couple of people who just joined the live stream. Just want to go ahead and brief you guys. This is another episode of Howdy Partner, so we definitely welcome you all. Here we have Adam and Dan here with Rancher Government Solutions, and they're showing us Kubernetes cluster management and the cool things that you can do and still be DISA certified, within the DISA, which is one of their compliance and regulatory guidelines. They're the only company that has that certificate. So this is pretty cool stuff. And yeah, so I don't know if there's any questions. If you do, ask in the chat. And also, this just looks pretty cool. I'm very excited as well that not only you have it very easy for someone who may have no experience with Kubernetes, but also you can still go back to the old school, go right into the CLI, and do that kgit config or kgit kgit nodes and stuff like that. So that's pretty cool. I'm still learning it, so this is cool to be right in the middle. So I have that flexibility to go back to and forth. So that's pretty sweet.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Great.
And for people just tuning in, if you want to follow along either right now or with the VOD in the future, I've had some banners going across with the links to the GitHubs and as well as the workshops, and they're also in the chat to make it easier so you don't have to type them in. Cool. Actually, we do have a quick question. We kind of talked about this a little bit earlier, but maybe they joined a little late.
Sure.
Do you have a mechanism, epinephrine S StarCraft 2? Do you have a mechanism to tie your R back to external identity proprietors? What is the complexity of that? We touched that a little bit. Maybe if you want to just poke real quick.
Yeah, I can pull that up really quick. Just kind of quickly.
Yeah.
That. So yeah, essentially Rancher ties back into all of these identity providers. This list continues to grow as releases continue to come out. But yeah, directly ties back into all of these. So you can use that existing user base that you have out there, make sure that you don't have to reinvent the wheel, manage 2 user bases, whatever the case may be. And then from there, if you have, for instance, groups defined in active directories, you can leverage that same existing group structure into Rancher and then apply specific roles from Rancher to those groups. Good question.
Awesome.
Cool.
Yeah, thank you for that.
For sure.
Great. I do have a question for Dan. I know we kind of talked before a little bit about his NASA history, and I'm just curious about the use cases, and I guess just anything in general is about like NASA. How can we incorporate this technology?
Yeah.
For
certainly. So yeah, I spent over a decade in my last role. I had multiple roles there. My last employer, another very large open source vendor, where I was a chief architect in the public sector group over there. And when I was coming up over there, I was basically a bag carrying rep, if you will. And my focus was the civilian government's scientific entities. So I had NASA, I had the Department of Energy, National Weather Service, NOAA, some of the NIH laboratories as well, and those organizations are very bleeding edge when it comes to software utilization because of the result of what they do, right? I mean, but if you look at Oak Ridge National Lab in Tennessee, for example, you've got some of the smartest people in the world using some of the most sophisticated scientific instrumentation ever designed, trying to ask questions about like, what are the fundamentals of matter? And, how big is the universe, right? Why is 80% of the universe dark energy, but we can't see it? Like things like that. And that kind of, necessarily brings along bleeding edge software. And, in the modality of open source software, right? You have some pretty exceptional capabilities that are emerging, and they emerge very rapidly. So in the context of NASA, as it were, you do have to lock hardware, right, pretty early on ahead of a flight. When you look at the Voyagers, you're talking like almost 10 years ahead of the launch was the actual hardware lock, and then the software locks, very shortly thereafter. Because once you're on orbit, you can't change anything, right? If you do, you risk losing contact with the spacecraft, and then you could have a $1 billion out of control nuclear powered instrument, hurtling around in the in the low Earth orbit or near Earth orbit, and that's just not a good situation. So in the context of what I was able to do in my my tenure working with NASA, first it started with flight vehicles. So I got to work on an instrument called SMAP, which is Soil Moisture Active Passive, which does exactly what it sounds like. It orbits the Earth and takes measurements of the actual surface of the Earth and the soil moisture, and it kind of does it over and over again to build a multi-year record of the humidity of the soil on the planet. And I also was involved in a group when I was chief architect that managed to put Kubernetes on the International Space Station to allow for like really rapid application changes. From Earth developed capabilities, pushing them to the ISS. Updating things. Bringing new capabilities to legacy equipment that's on orbit. Because it's cheaper to rewrite the software than it is to fly a rocket with some more instrumentation on it. It's changed the nature of the way these things behave. And I also worked on the Perseverance rover. which was really cool. You got multiple operating systems, multiple different types of compute up there. Everything's rad hardened, right? So the ability to have worked on that project, that was fun because that was more of a community cluster of capabilities that was owned by the CIO shop at the Jet Propulsion Laboratory, where OpenStack environment was leveraged by multiple like mechatronics engineers and software development engineers, and even like flight simulation engineers. It was very, very cool stuff. In this instance, it's open source being so bleeding edge, and Kubernetes at large being this next unit of compute, the new quanta of applications. There's use cases for this stuff all over the government, especially as it comes to the investments that the U.S. government's already made in existing systems and existing instrumentation and existing, think like HPC clusters. Or another great example of, I made $100 million investment in infrastructure, and now I need it to do something else. And how do I get it to do something else in a profound and performant way that isn't going to be a long pole in the tent for maintenance, or something that we can be rapidly usable and then reused? And we find, especially in the digital twinning space, the AI and ML space, legacy infrastructure is being reused, and we find ourselves kind of smack dab in the middle of the ease of use while bringing really profound, accelerated, and performant capabilities to that infrastructure. So it's really fun. It's a really cool customer base to have.
Wow, that's pretty good. And sometimes I'm thinking it's pretty scary too. Like, man, like you guys have a very important job to do as far as certainly securing it, as well as you have done, and it proves that it's not easy because it'll be more than just one approved company. So that's pretty sweet. So
I'll tell you this, Patrick, and I'll totally put Adam on the spot for this one too. I'm going to talk about scary. We were working on an initiative. It was before I got here. Adam was working on the initiative with the U2 National Laboratory. The spy plane with the big wings. The one that used to overfly the Soviet Union. And Adam's got a great story about chasing down the airplane in a Camaro.
Yeah. So
what
you get to see very cool things when you work sort of in the federal side of the business, right? So the way the plane works, it's essentially two wheels in a straight line. So whenever it lands, it needs to be perfectly straight, or else it's going to basically collapse in on itself. So I had the unique opportunity to sit in a Camaro, and as the plane was landing, the Camaro was driving, I think, around 120 miles per hour. Right behind it, and you can go look it up on YouTube. Just look up U2 chase car, and you literally drive about 10 feet from the U2 plane as it's landing. It's one of the craziest experiences of my life. So,
wow, that's thrilling.
Awesome.
Oh shoot, I'm gonna see if I can drop that in the chat. I think I see one here.
Did you find a link to it?
I don't know if it's this one, but I see it's a Dodge Charger and a U2 spy plane.
I will say this: like when you get started in the car makes a turn. I've never been more confident in my cars that it's not going to flip after how fast that car was going and not flipping. So,
oh man, yeah, that's
crazy.
Yeah, the idea, Adam, is to make sure that it's coming down level, right? So that the wheels don't like cock over and then it tumbles over tea kettle, right? Trying to prevent from pogoing or like nose diving or something.
Yep, correct. Yep.
So cool.
That's awesome.
And just one last thing, I'm going to chime in real quick. If you're watching, and please fill out our survey. I've dropped it in the chat a couple times. It's pinned to the top. Please let us know what you like. It's really fast. It's like 3 clicks. It wouldn't be AWS. I say this every week. It wouldn't be AWS without a survey. That's, I guess, the second most popular thing we're known for. So please take a second and let us know what you enjoyed, what you didn't enjoy, if you want to see less of me, more Patrick, that kind of thing. Adam, where are we on application management?
Absolutely.
Let's get back to the
I mean, I love story time. That was fun.
Yeah. No, it was good. It was good.
That was great.
So I do want to point out that cluster did come up fully healthy. I think it was around 8 minutes that it did come up. But that's just sort of the infrastructure piece. Rancher always also makes it as intuitive as possible to work with your applications that are getting deployed there. So this is a dev cluster that I have up and running. There's already application workloads running there. What if I want to start interfacing with those applications? From the Rancher UI, you have access to all of those. So I have a demo application that we'll dive into a little bit when we get to the automation piece. But it has a front end and a back end. And I'm going to go to the front end here. From here, I can come and look and see these are all the pods. under the Kubernetes deployment. I have 3 of them running currently. I can scale up this deployment. I can scale it down. I can also do things like redeploy it, which do a rolling restart of it, do a rollback to a previous configuration, add a sidecar if I want to do some fine-grained debugging, things like that. I can also do things which is critically important when you're talking about troubleshooting a problem. View the logs for all these pods directly from here. You can see here's all the logs that are coming from this specific pod. And if your pod has a shell, you can even drop down into the shell of that pod and actually see what commands are running. I don't have PS command running there, and this is failing for another reason, which we'll get into in the security piece a little bit later. But again, fully built for that end user to have access to be able to interface, manage, maintain all of their applications from a centralized point in an incredibly intuitive way. Now, I did promise you all, specifically you, James, the app catalog piece. So let's kind of walk through that a little bit. So Rancher in and of itself comes with a number of vetted applications that you can do ClickOps to install those applications, again, in an intuitive way. So that's the app catalog, the charts catalog. There's a few names for it, but it basically lives under apps and charts. Now, these are a collection of things that we will, from a support perspective, if you go with support from us, everything you see in blue here, you get root cause analysis support on all of these capabilities. We fully support those, even outside of our own product suite. We're very good at what we do, but we're also well aware that other people are very good at what they do. So to that point, there's a lot of open source tools that are out there that people still want that, as we like to say, single throat to choke if something catches on fire, instead of having to, pay 18 different vendors to figure out who is the person to call when this goes wrong. We try to simplify that and support things like sort of the best in breed monitoring stack, which is Grafana, Prometheus, things like that. Also Istio from a service mesh, all of these things that are built in. We also have all of our vetted certified integration charts, which are in orange here. These are all the things that we've done our due diligence to make sure that they are fully, what's the word I'm looking for, compatible from a deployment perspective onto our product stack. So again, try to make it as simple as possible. The UX that goes with this, if you've ever worked with Helm before, it can be a pain. We try to make this simplistic. So as I go through here, just to kind of walk through what that looks like, let me go here. This will actually give you the ability to carve out a form that will have all the most common things that a chart would have for you that you want to modify specifically in the context of monitoring. These are sort of those top level things that 80% of the time people are probably going to want to adjust a little bit in terms of scrape intervals, retention, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But we also want to keep in mind that people might want very deep level implementation details when it comes to that. You still have access to the underlying YAML file. Bear with me, this is lagging a little bit. There it goes. You can come in here and make those changes as well if you're looking for more very fine-grained things you would do to a Helm chart. So again, all of these things were built to make it sort of as easy as possible for that end user who doesn't really know Kubernetes. And I mentioned it before, these are all fully extensible. You can host your own repository that has your own collection of charts, whether that be within your own program or your own company, and then serve those up. And that user will have the exact same user experience that they did for those charts for your application. So I'll pause there. You guys have any comments about that?
I was going to say, Adam, so you're telling me I don't have to use Vim to change this YAML file. So that's pretty cool. Pretty cool.
Makes life way easier. Even though I am a Vim guy, yes, it still makes life
Cool.
I was just, it's at the time I was using Rancher, I wasn't super familiar with a lot of these, companies and partners, but it's cool to see when you click through the catalog. I saw like CodeFresh and Confluent, and I was like, I know these names now. These are cool people.
So quick pause. I got a question here from Never Oscar Mike. Are you able to use IAC or automation with the catalog? And guess what? Adam's going to be talking about that shortly.
Absolutely.
Nice.
That's a great question. So the app catalog was really built to be ClickOps more so than the automation piece. That being said, Rancher, what's running under Rancher is another Rancher tool known as Fleet. And Fleet is actually built to be that automation mechanism. If you prefer to go that route over ClickOps, we'll kind of, let's just dive into that because that's really the next thing. So thanks for setting me up on that one. So that's a perfect segue into that. So in context of Kubernetes, The way Kubernetes generally works is it's through in terms of automation and deploying your applications to environments, the best in breed way to do that is known as GitOps. And basically what GitOps is that you store the manifests of your application inside of a Git repository, and then you point your GitOps engine, in this case Fleet, to that Git repository. And basically what will happen under the hood is your GitOps engine is going to go to that Git repository and constantly reconcile the application in your cluster based off of what's in there. And that has two benefits, well, a number of benefits, but benefits on both sides. For one, if you've worked with Git before, you get all the benefits of Git, right? So you have your audit trail through Git history. You have quick reversions. You can do a revert back to a previous commit or whatever the case may be. You also have all these security pieces that go with that, right? So think about things like merge requests, pull request approvals, and making sure that these selective groups make sure that they're the only ones who can approve and merge something into a specific branch. All those capabilities come with Git. On the other side of this, you also have the ability to quickly reconcile your application back into that expected state. Generally speaking, if you're using GitOps, you don't want Joe Schmo system admin to go into your cluster and manually modify anything. Everything and every change that you make should be in your Git repository. Your GitOps engine will have the ability to reconcile that automatically back into that expected state in the event that somebody nefarious or otherwise goes in and tries to change something. So that's sort of TLDR on GitOps. That being said, in terms of the automation piece, the engine powering everything that you see with Rancher is known as Fleet, and Fleet is our GitOps engine. So I do want to walk through sort of the capabilities that go with Fleet and sort of the benefits that come with GitOps in general. So to that point, and James, I know you shared it, it's a little bit up further, but we have, I have a GitHub in my personal GitHub for this specific event. All the manifests that you're going to see for this and beyond are all in here. If you're playing with Rancher, you should be able to use this and leverage it to spin those things up. For the sake of this, I'm going to go to automation and GitOps Fleet. And basically what I have in here, and I'm actually going to switch my branch here. So let's make the assumption that I have 3 clusters, dev, staging, and prod. And from a Git perspective, I want to use a typical Git flow, right? I might have dev as my working branch where my developers are constantly making changes to. I want that to automatically get updated in a cluster. But then I also want to be able to flow that through to staging and prod through typical Git pull requests and things like that. That's exactly where Fleet is a super powerful tool. So one of the major benefits of Fleet over some of the alternatives that are out there, and this is going to go full circle back to you, is the fact that with other tools, if you're trying to do centralized management from a GitOps perspective, you still need to manage the handshake piece of that. The benefit of Rancher, that piece is already done. The cluster is already being managed from Rancher, so we don't have to worry about that. And since a cluster is just a Kubernetes resource, it has labels attached to it. And I'm going to jump into this because this will make a little more sense looking at the config of this demo application. You have the ability to target specific applications based off of labels on that cluster. So that's incredibly powerful if you think of the fact that now I have a cluster that is labeled env dev, and I can come down to my cluster and just take a look at that so you guys can fully believe me. From a dev perspective, I have env dev here. So basically, from a Git repository perspective, in this demo dev, this is only going to be applicable to any cluster that has that label. That's incredibly important if you think of new clusters coming online who might need things like the security stack that are installed on those, like NeuVector. If I come down to NeuVector, and let's actually come over to clusters and take a look at this one, even though my keyboard, and for whatever reason, might be a resource problem, ran out of it. Oh yeah, I didn't have Cert Manager pre-installed on there, so that's a dependency thing that I forgot to put there. However, NeuVector installed seamlessly without me doing anything. If you remember, whenever I stood that cluster up, all I did was label security equals enabled without me doing anything else. As soon as that cluster came online, Fleet dynamically installed NeuVector and configured it up to those security standards. So especially in our environments, but beyond that, security should be everybody's top priority. Having the ability to automate your clusters into compliance and a secure environments the second it comes online is incredibly powerful. So that's sort of that part of it. I'll pause there. You guys have any comments?
That was very easy. I'm sorry. Yeah, that was pretty easy. So no reason to not secure your nodes and your pods.
Absolutely. Yeah, 100%. And NeuVector, I can't wait to get NeuVector I've spent a lot of time on NeuVector. It's a great tool, especially if you're working in Kubernetes. Can't wait to get to that. The other thing I want to hit on from a GitOps perspective is sort of the Git flow that goes with how this works, right? So right now over here, I'm going to take a look at my pull requests. I have a pull request seeded that it has a literal one-line change, but let's make the assumption that I'm going from the image in dev from 1.0 to 2.0. Now, this is what my demo app is. It's stupid simplistic. Basically, all it's doing is doing a backend request. This is my dev environment going to 2.0. This is my staging environment currently going to, give that a second, it's a 5-second ping, 1.0. The great thing about this, and I'll come over here and just merge this in so you all can see this. I'm going to merge that and come back to Rancher. And this will take a second or two to actually propagate because it's on a polling interval back to that. But at some point within a few minutes, we'll actually see this demo staging environment go from active to in progress. And all I did was merge that in. I didn't have to do anything else because this demo staging environment is monitoring that Git repository and that branch. That change is going to automatically and dynamically happen without me having to go and modify anything in the cluster. And that could all be done through Git. So you can see it's starting to do that propagation. It takes a little bit of time, but eventually you're going to see this shift to 2.0 again with just the click of a mouse from a merge perspective.
Nice.
So that's the automation piece. I will say that, and this is something that Rancher's working on now, the integration piece between the application catalog and Fleet are getting tighter and tighter to make it that once you install something through the application catalog, it'll show up over here. That piece isn't quite there today, so you still need to carve out your own Git repositories. We on the Rancher Federal side, and I can certainly find this and share it out at some point, have sort of a templated implementation of a lot of those things for you to get to that point. But that integration piece is definitely coming from a Rancher perspective.
Cool.
Cool.
Nice.
There you go. So you can see it jumped up to 2. So it's
wow.
fun to propagate that out. So it's going to flip back and forth because it's stood up in HA, so it's going to take a few seconds to fully propagate. But yeah, that's sort of our story around automating the application flow. Incredibly important. If you're leveraging Kubernetes today and you're not leveraging GitOps, especially at scale, I'd highly recommend going that direction because it's going to make your life way, 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 way easier as you start scaling out more and more.
Wow.
I just had a question, just real quick.
Sure.
That dependency that didn't go through that we saw earlier, what is the consequence of that?
Absolutely. So that's a very good question. So the consequence of this, and this was just my own not planning appropriately, is the fact that basically, and this is another powerful piece of Fleet in general, is that you can define a dependency chain between your Git repositories. So the one thing that I didn't do in context of this specific cluster is pre-create a namespace and its reliance on that namespace. So if I come into my cluster and create the actual namespace, let me see what the condition is specifically. Keyboard no bundles matching app cert manager. Oh, I need to just install cert manager. So the implication of this is what I didn't have. And you know what? Let's fix it. Let's do it on the fly, right? So let's go into the configuration here. Go over to this. So this is targeting cert manager from a cluster group perspective. This is just another way to logically group clusters together. If I go over to cluster group and let's take a look at cert manager and look at this configuration, this is going to look for any cluster that has certs equals enabled. I just didn't label my cluster with that. Just my own fault. I forgot to do that. I can come over here, do edit config, and do certs enabled. And the second I do that and add this label to this cluster and come back to my Git repositories, you'll see that cert manager is now working towards deploying into that environment. Once that is there, and this is the other added benefit of GitOps, once this reconciles itself, this will fix itself after this is in place. So it's essentially just the dependency chain that you carve out for your applications that you can carve out for, if you've worked with cert manager before, there's a lot of projects that require it. So in general, it's good to have that deployed and then have a dependency structure defined in your Git repo to say, make sure cert manager is there first so it doesn't fall on its face. I just forgot to have the specific label to install cert manager first.
Okay. But everything else still spun up and it was just basically yelling at you saying, hey, I tried to spin everything up, but you forgot this.
Correct.
Okay.
Yep. And to go back to inception a little bit, the fact that your infrastructure is actually a Kubernetes resource, you have the ability to even GitOps your infrastructure. So I don't have that demo live today, but you can actually carve it out that essentially Rancher will provision your Kubernetes clusters automatically, configure those labels for you so you don't make the same mistake I did, because again, that was me manually doing it. Anybody doing anything manually, you're going to make mistakes. So the more you can automate, the more you can configure as infrastructure as code, the better off you'll be. And Rancher gives you the ability to automate not only the provisioning of your cluster through GitOps, but then your applications onto those clusters. So again, incredibly powerful from that perspective.
Wow.
All right.
Impressive.
So dmac, do you have anything else? I'm going to dive into NeuVector next. I didn't know if there was anything from an automation piece that you wanted to.
No, I think that makes, actually putting NeuVector next makes a lot of sense.
Awesome, cool. And I just saw that question come in about, yes, you can manage those clusters. I think I have that. Let me check and see. I have that in a gist somewhere, just so you guys can kind of see what that looks like. But let's see.
Oh, look at that! Look at that
A
picture.
handsome guy. My wife.
Yeah.
Good looking dude. So your wife hates that picture?
No, pick that picture.
Oh, that was a good choice.
So to that question, like this is the YAML file that will provision a cluster in Kubernetes. I can actually take this and paste it in. It would actually provision a cluster. I'm not going to do it because cost money and all that stuff. But nonetheless, yes. So since this is a manifest, you can store this manifest in a Git repository, point Fleet to it, and Fleet will take this manifest and actually provision an Amazon EC2 cluster running RK2. From there, you can do the same thing with EKS or whatever the case may be, and then apply specific labels to this, and then automate the flow from this the whole way down to your application. So again, soup to nuts from your clusters coming up on AWS, the whole way down to your actual applications deploying onto those clusters can all be automated and managed through Fleet. It's a great question, though. We get that a lot. Cool. So the next thing I'm very excited about, you can see Kubernetes starting to go through. It's finally finishing up its next thing there. So user data. So yes, there is, and that is going to be more robust. So it's not an entire implementation of user data, but in a very near future release, there will be seamless user data incorporated into that. So you can do things like pre-configure your nodes with whatever bootstrapping things that you need to do. But another great question. So NeuVector, topic near and dear to my heart. So I am a zero trust nerd. I bought heavy into what is known as service meshes at the Kubernetes layer. And that's basically the ability to offload security from your application teams and do it at the platform level. NeuVector is sort of a different spin from a service mesh perspective, and it's a less invasive way to secure your entire Kubernetes infrastructure. So I already have NeuVector configured on my dev cluster. I'm going to go ahead and open that. And give that a second. And I'll just go to the dashboard first, even though it just quickly hit on it. So NeuVector is our layer 7 container security platform built for Kubernetes. It does a lot of things. We're not going to be able to cover everything with the time we have together today. I'm going to just highlight some of my favorite pieces of it. The one thing I always say about security is that there is, and you at AWS are probably well aware of this, there's no silver bullet when it comes to security. Any person who tells you that is lying and selling you snake oil. You should always approach security as defense in depth. That's a very critical component. NeuVector is an incredibly powerful tool in your tool belt. Is it the only tool you need? Absolutely not. You should do things like, especially from an AWS perspective, make sure you have your NACLs configured properly, security groups, isolating things to the best of your ability, even beyond this. Just always like to caveat that because there's been plenty of times that things that have been said otherwise around other tools. So, cool. So this is NeuVector. This is just sort of an overarching view of the current state of this specific cluster. It's fair. That's fine. For the sake of a demo, I haven't hardened this cluster in any respect, just for the sake of simplicity today. But beyond that, let's kind of dive into what NeuVector is actually doing. So what NeuVector is doing, and this is sort of a differentiator for NeuVector as opposed to some of the other tools that are out there that do somewhat similar things. NeuVector is actually tapping directly into the VNIs or virtual network interfaces under the hood on the host machines that Kubernetes is running on. Now, the added benefit of that is, for one, it's incredibly fast. For two, it reduces dependencies on things like eBPF or specific CNI. It really can work on any system because it's just tapping into that actual traffic to do things like determine full telemetry of traffic into your cluster, out of your cluster, and within your cluster. So this is sort of just a web of what's talking to what inside of my cluster. I did not specify any of this. NeuVector figured all of this out on its own without me having to do anything. So this is just a visualization piece of sort of how the networking of my cluster looks, but it goes way beyond that in terms of the capabilities that go around that. So I'm going to focus mostly on the policy side of things today, and I'm going to quickly hit on some things. I'm going to spend most of my time on the network rules piece because from a zero trust perspective, that's one of the most critical components of this. But you can also set up admission controls very intuitively with NeuVector. What admission controls are is that the way Kubernetes works itself is that Kubernetes is just an API that you pass resources to. And based off of what you pass those resources to Kubernetes, it'll go and modify things within sort of your Kubernetes infrastructure. Policy enforcement sits in front of that API. And as requests come into the API, before it gets there, it'll parse that against whatever rules that you have defined. And if it falls out of line of that specific control that you're going up against, it'll block that request from ever getting to your API. So it's sort of that that security gate in front of your API to make sure that people aren't making requests to do things. And I'll pull this up to put that in perspective a little bit. Like deploy a pod that has the ability to do privilege escalation, or in the constructs of NeuVector, NeuVector has the ability to scan pods for CVEs against their database. If you have a specific pod that has a certain threshold of high severity CVEs, block that request from coming through. So this is all pretty intuitive in terms of pointing and clicking and getting all this set up. This is sort of that first layer of security in terms of making sure that as stuff comes in, it's not going to put you out of your specific compliance guidelines that you have built into it. So that's just one piece of the pie. That's just sort of the top level admission control that goes with that. The next thing I want to focus on is the network rules. That's my personal favorite. So back to my demo app. Basically what's happening from a demo app perspective, I have a front-end pod that's starting up this UI. And basically, and I'll pull this up so you guys know I'm not cheating, every 5 seconds, it's actually just making an HTTP request back to that pod, which is proxying to my back-end pod running in my cluster. So basically, traffic's coming from the outside world into the front-end pod, which is proxying the request to the back-end to grab the version and serve that back through. So to that point, I'm going to just search for front-end in here, since that's the name of my pod. So NeuVector is built on behavioral learning. Everything you're seeing here was learned from NeuVector. I didn't have to do anything that goes with that. To that point, this is the traffic that NeuVector calculated from all of that traffic. So you can see here, as I mentioned before, we have that request going from my front-end pod to my back-end pod. So even having this information in and of itself is powerful. But what about enforcing the fact that I want this to be my baseline of traffic, and anything that falls outside of this, I want to implicitly deny. So I'm going to do this globally because it's just easy. You can do this for specific applications, but I'm going to come down to settings here and go to configurations. And I have this network security policy mode. There's 3 different policies or 3 different modes that you can be in. Discover, that's going to actually learn that traffic. The second is monitor. You can think of that as sort of an audit capability that if something falls outside of the policy guidelines, you can set up alerting, webhooks, things like that to Slack, whatever the case may be. The last one is protect. So I'm going to click protect here and go down here and click submit. And now that I've done that, I'm going to come back to my policy, go back to my network rules, and look for front end. Now, these are all the baseline of traffic that was determined during that discovery phase. My application is still working, but I can come over here and delete this rule to allow that traffic from front end to back end and save that. And within a few seconds of doing that, and if I come back over here, we should see this starting to fail and actually spit back an error that you can go see. So again, that was all without me doing anything. And if I would have just been in that enforcement mode with that default amount of traffic specified, this is inherently building out a zero trust architecture without you having to do too much on top of that, which if you've ever tried to implement something like a service mesh, it's very heavy handed. It's a lot of work to get there. This is sort of an easy button to move towards that level of simplicity. I'll pause there if you guys have any comments from that side of things.
Nothing for me other than just going back to the map we showed earlier. That is super handy just to have the visual representation of how things are hooked up and flowing. It if you ever want, like, it would just to have that in a glance is a huge times, like, because I mean, even the best person ever, they still have to fish through files and YAMLs and stuff to do all that. And this is, you just see it. It's nice.
That's a great point. In a previous life, I was managing a set of Java applications. They were all microservice infrastructure, but they were built in a very rigid framework at the application layer. From a zero trust perspective, every application there, a new developer coming on board, it took them a month to onboard at minimum because they needed to learn the framework. But beyond that, they needed to figure out what is talking to what for their specific application they're working on. And it's never easy, especially once you get into more complex microservice infrastructure. So yeah, even having this visual capability to know this is what my application is interfacing with is incredibly valuable.
And I'm sure. Oh, go ahead. Sorry about that, Patrick.
No, go ahead. I was just going to say we have some comments, some questions in the chat, but go ahead. Continue.
No, you don't want to hear me talk. Questions are important.
No worries.
So enough.
Okay, no worries. We do have one. They did ask, do these services come with the paid version of Rancher, or can you use an open source version with free Rancher?
Yeah, that's a great question. So NeuVector actually was a closed source tool. Rancher / SUSE, the parent organization above us, acquired them and fully open sourced it. So you can go out today, install NeuVector on your cluster, and leverage everything you're seeing here. From our side of things, NeuVector is a beast. It's incredibly difficult to configure properly. That's why we always highly recommend support on top of it from our side of things, just to make sure that we can kind of be that person to call to make sure that you're configuring things properly, especially once you get into the web application firewall and deep level packet inspection capabilities that go with that. And we'll cover that in a little bit.
Wow, great. And we have another question coming in here. They mentioned how useful is the map on a much larger cluster, maybe like 10,000 pods. Seems like it could get pretty messy, which I definitely agree with that statement.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. And you can scope that down to these specific rules. You can filter based off of whatever you want for the specific map, break down by namespaces. Now, one caveat to that, as you scope things down, the more granular that's going to be, right? So you lose some of the overarching view, but especially if you're just deploying applications in the confines of a specific namespace, you definitely have the ability to do that.
Wow, I love it. Love the questions, chat.
Yep.
Is this shareable? We got this question as well. Can you share this?
Export it, yeah.
Share export capabilities. That's a good question. I actually have never tried to export it to know if that is possible. Whenever I've had to share it, I usually just do a screenshot. So I'll have to get back to you on that one. I don't see any capability that I'm seeing right here in terms of making this map exportable, especially given from an import perspective, this is fully dynamic based off of the cluster. It's pertinent to NeuVector itself, right? So you couldn't import it into another NeuVector to visualize it, only from the preface that NeuVector would be showing the telemetry of that of itself. Yeah, let's look at this count. I think that just focuses from the camera.
I see.
Good question.
I guess the security component, you might not want to share this because it tells a whole lot. It's a pretty vivid roadmap. So security is job zero here. So yeah, probably won't be a best practice in that case. Yep.
And Mike, if that is your name, either Oscar or Mike, whatever that is. Yeah, so that's a good question. And NeuVector is tied back to the RBAC controls that I mentioned before. So you can actually create an RBAC control for NeuVector to allow a cyber assessor only to have read access to NeuVector itself. So that's sort of the other side of this, that through Rancher, they would be able to access this without having the ability to modify anything under the hood as well.
Cool. I guess, is there anything, I think there's something else you wanted to show us. We're running short on time. I don't want to.
Sure. Yeah. Let me get to it real quick here. So
everyone always says 2 hours is hard to fill, but then when we come to 15 minutes at the end, it's like we have more to show.
Yeah. So you know what? Let's go NeuVector there. And as I said before, maybe in the future we can come back to it. You could spend 2 hours on NeuVector itself. We haven't gotten into it, but it can do things like web application firewall configurations. and deep level packet inspection. The only thing I want to say about web application firewall is our customers who were leveraging NeuVector actually were able to mitigate the effects of Log4Shell. Everyone knows what Log4Shell is at this point. At the platform level, before there were any patches or fixes that were out there, essentially this web application firewall sat outside at that virtual network interface layer, and through the typical regex that was used to determine, is this a vulnerability, block that traffic from going to the outside world before it could. So the applications themselves didn't have to change anything, and our customers were fully mitigated. So again, another massive capability built into NeuVector. Can't dive too much into it today for the sake of time, but yeah.
Nice. Yeah,
Nice.
that's great that it would be able to catch something like that before it even gets patched early. That's huge.
Well, another thing to note too is not in the context of the WAF sensors, but certainly with the DLP, is the platform itself can observe regular communications between pods, regular traffic, expected traffic between certain elements that are running inside of your kube infrastructure. And once it has a good idea of what is to be expected, you can parameterize what's not expected. And NeuVector can interpret some chatty traffic between two pods that don't ordinarily communicate and dynamically isolate them without putting anybody's hands on anything. It's like, nope, this shouldn't happen, and then turn everything off, wall things off, dynamically honeypot. So you don't have anybody who has access to a particular pod trying to exfil through a location where they don't have the ability to, shouldn't have had the ability to do that in the first place. That NeuVector can actually observe the totality of your container infrastructure and determine what normal looks like, so that anything can be parameterized as abnormal as it deviates from the implied normal, and start doing really rapid security, turning things off, flipping switches, and turning knobs. It's really, really cool stuff.
Yeah, very much so.
Wow.
And there were a couple other questions. Let me hit those real quick before I dive into Carbide, since we are coming up on time. In terms of things specific to the government, so the government is all about security. And the one thing I'll say about security is reciprocity. So if you're working in the federal space and you have the ability to show that the infrastructure, the architecture that you're deploying has been deployed in another environment and it's been proven to already be secured, much like our software is running all over the place. It's already has those approvals. If you have those approvals in one place, it depends on the situation, but a lot of times you'll get that reciprocity in another environment, which streamlines your process to get your application deployed tenfold. It can be a massive undertaking if you're taking something that has never been approved for any of those environments to get there. So the one thing I want to note is that architecting your system to leverage tools that are utilizing things that have already been through the ATO process, the RMF process, things like Rancher, things like RK2, things like NeuVector that are being used in these isolated environments is incredibly important. The second question about the host level traffic, in context of the host reaching out to other things, no, but in terms of the nodes themselves reaching into Kubernetes and Kubernetes reaching the nodes themselves, yes, it is at this point scoped to be Kubernetes centric. Cool.
Oh, and it's any Kubernetes.
Yes.
Any Kubernetes. It's not just our Kubernetes. It can run on EC2. It can run on any Kubernetes that you like, because it's sitting at layer 7, and anywhere you're running containers and you need to apply a security baseline and a policy enforcement platform, NeuVector can go with you regardless of what Kubernetes you're running.
Yep.
Yeah, agnostication is massive. Like, everyone has their own things, their own use cases, what they prefer. If you have to have it, at least to a certain degree, for sure.
Very much so.
Yeah.
Great. Well, I don't know. Do we have anything we could show in like 5 minutes, or should we just start wrapping up?
I do want to, if you give me 5 minutes, I want to quickly hit on Stigatron, because I think it's a massive.
You have 5 minutes.
Got 5 minutes. I can do it. So on our side of things, we started building out products tailored specifically to our federal customers. We already talked about the STIG. That's just one piece of it. What about day 2 operations on that STIG? Being able to prove compliance is incredibly important. So this is a value add for our supported customers. You do need a support agreement in place with us, but if you have a support agreement in place with it, you'll get access to Stigatron, as well as our hardened images that have digital signatures and attestations and SBOMs. We also have air-gap friendly docs to give you documentation for the entire Rancher product suite in any environment that you work against. But from a Stigatron perspective, you can essentially scan your entire fleet of RK2 clusters. So I'm going to go ahead and just trigger a scan here. And basically what that's doing, it's standing up an ephemeral daemon set that's spinning up a pod on each node that has access to what it needs to validate the compliance of this cluster against that STIG. And once that scan completes, it takes around 20 seconds or so. I'm just going to click over here for the sake of time. You then have the ability to open the visualizer. So we worked with a tool, a company known as Miter. They developed a great tool called Heimdall. I'll give that a second to load. It can be a little slow depending on the connection. So it might take a second. Let me actually reload that. Live demos, right? I did warn you all.
It looks like it wants to. There it goes.
Slow.
Oh.
Yeah, I don't know why I'm getting a bad image here. Let me try to scan. Oh, you know what? I know what my problem is.
Security.
Yeah, so I'm too secure now.
It's a good problem to have.
Can't be. All right, so we got to fix that. So let's try that again. There it goes.
Hey,
winner.
Okay.
So
Nice.
it's a visualization of the current state of this cluster. So this cluster isn't hardened up to the nth degree. It has a lot of things in place, but this is a visualization of how performant this cluster is against that STIG. I can come down here, see all the scans that were executed. If I want to know why the scan failed, I can actually get the exact command that was executed against my cluster and the failed output of that. If I want to know how to fix it, this will give me all that metadata as well. In terms of proving this, one of the major capabilities that I was most excited about is you have the ability to export these findings into a number of formats. Most importantly, if you work in the federal space, you can export this as your XCCDF and your checklist file. Those are those formats that are going to get ingested into the cyber systems to automate away a lot of those pain points. Because the way this works prior to this tool, you would have a cyber assessor standing beside you with a checklist, asking you to run a command and reading that and then checking the box. This automates away a lot of those pain points for our customers. So we see a lot of benefit to this, and we've got a lot of great feedback from our customer in terms of this. And we're sort of just at a jumping off point from a Carbide perspective in general, from the secured images to Stigatron that you're seeing here, the air gap docs. We're also building out capabilities around the air gap. Those things are just going to continue to grow and improve as we're going. But we really built that out to be a value add to our supported customers. So if you're working with us, you already have a support agreement with us, by all means. If you want to check it out, let us know. If you want to have access to it, you're curious about support, by all means, come to us. We're happy to support you, get you access to these cool tools. Did I do it? A minute to spare.
Yeah,
Perfect.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Awesome.
That was great. I really enjoyed this entire. You guys have a plethora of applications that just make things so easy. Compliance, clicking buttons to get those accreditations. That takes a lot of pressure off of you. I enjoyed it from the moment you guys joined, and I'm sure James probably has the same sentiments. So this is just pretty sweet. So great show.
Cool. Anything you want to? People can connect with you on LinkedIn. I'm sure you're there.
Oh yeah.
We also dropped a number of links in the chat. We have some thank yous from the chat. Thank you for showing up, chat, and having great questions today. Don't forget to smash that like button. I told there's the obligatory thing. I've heard 40% of you watching aren't subscribed. Please subscribe to it. And we will be back next week with Quera, a quantum computing partner. Patrick, what does Quera do?
They're they have a platform called Blockade for integrating integrating neutral atom arrays. So we go from NASA, government stuff to some quantum arrays and atoms. So this sounds pretty interesting. So if you guys are interested, make sure you stay tuned. That was going to be every Wednesday at 2 p.m. PT, 5 p.m. Eastern time. So we're stoked and definitely hope you guys will be there.
Yeah, and thank you one last time to Rancher for coming in. Thank you, Adam. Thank you, DMAC. This was great. Maybe we can have you back in the future, since there was just so much stuff that we could keep going, and I'm sure by then there'll be even more to talk about. So
yeah, thank you guys for having us. We had a great time.
Yeah, thank you very much. This was a blast.
Yeah, great. Thank you, everybody, and we'll see you next week. Okay.
All right.
Bye.
Awesome.
Thanks.
Let's go. Key.